The farm. People from the town of Assyria whispered its name as if it were cursed. No one had ever seen it with their own eyes, and no poor soul who ended up there ever returned unless they were part of Jaeger's gang. Even those who had the right to leave dared not speak about it. Sometimes rebellious children were frightened with visions of its hellish depths, and cruel parents would say to their offspring,
"If you don't behave, we'll send you to the farm."
If you don't help your father in the barn, we'll send your sister to the farm.
If you don't marry that handsome fellow with a bit of money, we'll send you to the farm.
Yet these were empty threats, for in truth, no parent would ever send their own child or anyone else's to that macabre land hidden among the hills and dead trees. Among the wretches who found themselves in this demonic place, there were rebellious prostitutes who had dreamed of another profession and now had to work day and night to satisfy the desires of Everett's men. There were also travelers who, unaware of the local laws, incurred the wrath of the gang and couldn't pay their debts. One could even find people who had simply given John a crooked look, cursed at Daniel, or won a game of dice against Marvin. The farm housed a few masters and a mass of slaves who worked until the end of their days. No one returned alive from that hell. Men died from exhausting labor, extracting stones, cutting down trees, or farming the barren land. Women served their employers with their bodies, cooked, cleaned, and worked just as hard as the men. Those who were unfit for life in the camp due to illness, meager rations, or brutal treatment from the guards ended up with the witch, who conducted numerous nightmarish experiments on them. Over the years, a few uprisings broke out, led by even fewer brave souls who tried to fight oppression and gain freedom. But every one of them, regardless of gender, ended their lives with cries of despair, tortured and crucified at visible points around the farm, so that every old or newly arrived doomed soul would know the truth. No one defied Jaeger's gang unpunished. So it was no surprise that a few crosses with hanging corpses greeted the wagon carrying the pale Everett. Sitting beside him was the proud Shelby, looking down on the three men pulling the cart. They were breathing heavily, especially Daniel, who struggled under the sun's scorching heat. He was old enough to feel the weight of such a journey in his bones. The trip from the witch's hut to the farm had taken them 2 hours. Outside, by the bushes, 10 people were working under the constant watch of 2 guards armed with loaded shotguns, who occasionally lashed out at the lazier workers with whips. However, upon seeing the weakened Jaeger, the slaves halted their work, and their overseers refrained from punishing them. The sight that they witnessed chilled their hearts. Yet no one rejoiced, neither the bandits nor the victims, because, in the shadow of his father, patiently waiting to seize power, stood his ruthless son. Duncan was not as dignified as Everett. He wasn't as calm or composed. He was a grim caricature of John Marlowe, an even worse version. He was like a storm trapped in a jar, waiting to be unleashed. The wagon traveled 3/4 of the length of land belonging to the Jaeger family before it stopped at the largest house, which reached up to 3 stories. The injured, still feverish leader disembarked from the wagon without assistance. He refused help, seeing it as a sign of weakness. He trudged heavily to the porch and sat in his favorite rocking chair. No one else was allowed to use it, not even his own son, who would face a cruel punishment for breaking this rule. As he regained his bearings, he looked at everyone gathered around, who had arrived in the meantime, and then his gaze settled on Daniel Sills. Knowing him since childhood, Jaeger could tell he wanted to say something. He nodded, granting him permission.
"Perhaps you should rest after everything that's happened?"
His companion suggested.
After everything that's happened, and what exactly has happened?
His voice was chillingly cold, like the night air on the great desert.
Can someone explain to me what happened?
We were attacked.
Marvin Rupert began.
No.
Everett cut him off.
That was merely the consequence of what had already transpired.
He spoke with great difficulty.
John, perhaps you can explain to me what happened.
John Marlowe, who had been standing in the back until now, trying not to draw attention, realized his effort was in vain, for Everett never forgets. He never forgives. John, known for his hot temper and eagerness to fight, now resembled a frightened, helpless child lost in the fog when standing before his boss. He trembled all over as he stepped forward. He didn't want to, but he knew he had no choice.
John, can you explain to me why you didn't tell me that he was involved in this?
I didn't know.
John stammered, trying to avoid eye contact with his boss.
You didn't know? Or did you just forget to mention it to me?
I didn't know. Really. He only warned me when I approached the woman. He just warned me. He
warned you? So you conveniently forgot to tell me about this insignificant detail when you were telling me the story about the woman with the imperial coins. Isn't that right, John?
Yes?
He whispered fearfully.
What did you mutter under that crooked nose of yours? Can you repeat it a bit louder? Just a few hours ago, you couldn't shut your mouth.
I forgot to tell you.
Everett stood up from his chair, using his cane for support. With difficulty, he moved closer to John, and although he wasn't feeling his best, he still instilled fear among his men and terror among the slaves. After a brief, mindless gaze at the sky, he finally looked toward Sills again and said, concealing his emotions under a blanket of cold tone,
Perhaps you can tell me why you suggested I should rest. Do you think I'm tired? Do I look unwell?
That's not what I meant.
Then what did you mean?
Jaeger deftly flipped the cane, grabbing it by the other end with his left hand, and unexpectedly struck John square in the head. He fell flat on the ground, instinctively trying to cover his bleeding forehead. He didn't manage to, as the second blow came swiftly and was far more powerful than the first. Everett began mercilessly beating Marlowe so hard that eventually his skull cracked like an eggshell, and moments later, his brain spilled out like yolk. This, however, didn't stop the cruel man from delivering another dozen or so blows. The air filled with the sound of the cane slicing through it, the crunch of breaking bones, and the murmur of horrified onlookers. The entire symphony was accompanied by the increasingly rapid breathing of the enraged executioner. Throughout this brutal spectacle, no one dared to express opposition. Fear and silence dominated among those gathered, knowing that any dissent might lead to an equally gruesome end. After a moment, John's brain had turned into jam, a dirty, gelatinous jam that splattered the shocked people standing too close to the gruesome scene. No one dared to interrupt the display, and more importantly, no one dared to walk away from this paralysis. The only fleeting thought that circled in their minds was, John deserved it. And soon after, relief followed. Thank God it's not me.
Do you still think I'm tired?
Jaeger asked Daniel once he finished battering Marlowe's lifeless body.
No, you're not tired.
Sills replied coolly, looking straight into his friend's eyes.
I must have been mistaken.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Now prepare the food rations, water, filters, vaccines, and the wagon. And anything else we'll need. We leave in an hour. I'm taking you, Marvin, Ethan, and...
He glanced at John's mangled body, then began scrutinizing the people around him. Finally, he spotted one brave man who hadn't lowered his gaze.
Rufus Francis, am I right?
Yes, sir.
Rufus answered without hesitation.
How long have you been working for me? 3, 4 years?
3 years, sir.
Great. As you can see, there's a vacancy for someone like you. From today, you're one of the most important people on the farm. Don't disappoint me, or you'll end up like John Marlowe. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Enough of the sir. Now go fetch my son, Duncan. I have something to tell him before I set off.
Shelby approached the embittered Jaeger, the lord and master of the farm, pleading with her eyes for him not to leave. He was still weak, and his life hung by a thread, but he was consumed by fury. Rage swelled within him, and when he looked at his bandaged stump, he hated himself. It wasn't just about revenge, but something more. It was about justice, retribution, an infinitely deep wrath.
You'll die.
The witch prophesied.
You'll die if you don't stay here. You need to heal first. I still haven't brought your fever down.
That's why you're coming with me,
Everett replied.
You'll have just one task. Keep me alive while we make this journey there and back.
And where exactly are you going?
Where we're going,
He corrected her.
we're embarking on a journey across the great desert. I will traverse hell and the forgotten land of the gods just to catch him and her.
That's
Madness? It seems to be as contagious as the common plague. After all, I killed John, so his madness must have found a new home. Apparently, that's the price for killing him.
And if I refuse?
You can stay, but without me, my son will scalp and crucify you. He's been waiting for this ever since you rejected his advances. This time I'll give him free rein, so you have a choice, me or my son. Whom do you choose?
To hell with you, Everett.
Jaeger smirked. It was a sinister, grim smile.
Welcome aboard, Shelby White,
He said sarcastically, while in the meantime, all his key men prepared for the journey. Daniel Sills, Marvin Rupert, the previously mentioned Ethan Woodworth, and the new member of the farm's council, Rufus Francis, who received the divine echo in the form of a boomerang that had once belonged to the now murdered John Marlowe. Every one of these men was ready to kill for Everett, and more than that, to accompany him on a journey through the hellish land known as the Great Desert. A new race had begun, a game between the prey and the hunter, a game of revenge and escape, a game between Jaeger and the mysterious Nameless One.